Hello, my friends. Welcome to the latest edition of Here's What We Know, the podcast of unexpected conversations. And today we will live up to that. I guarantee you that. There are few legendary names in the country music radio business. There are. There's just not a bunch. I can only think of a few of them off the top of my head. But one of them is this young lady right here. This is Devin O'Day. And I am so thrilled that you agreed to come on and share all your stories with me, because do you know you and I started in radio the same year?
Oh my gosh. Have we seen it change? Have we seen it change? Oh my gosh.
Everything has. And that was a long time ago. You were in a small town in Louisiana, and I was in a small town in Alabama.
And you know what? In those stations, as far as for my hometown, that station is still the lifeblood of that little town. What about you?
There's a little town. It's again, you always remember it's WKWL AM 1230, the gateway to the Gulf Coast, Florella, Alabama. You know what's fun is they called me up like a year ago because I know the guy who owns the station. It's still located in a house trailer down.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
I was on the air one morning. I was doing the morning show, and it was during a storm. And all of a sudden, I heard, and the station went, and we went off the air. And I went and opened the door, and our antenna had fallen and missed the station by about 15 feet.
Oh my Lord. So you're lucky to be
How about
here.
that? I am. The good Lord said, you got one more shift in you. But the guy who owns the station, he called me up. He sent me a text and he goes, listen, would you do me some liners? And I'm like, yes, I will.
I love it. Yeah,
I had to come home and go, hey, it's me. You don't even remember who I am, but here I am.
I know exactly what you know. That KRRV called me in Pineville, Louisiana, and they called me, and they were in between air personalities. They said, "Hey, would you voice track until we find somebody that's here?" And I said, so for about a month, I voice tracked one of the shifts for them and kept everything live and local. They said, we can't get anybody to talk about local stuff that's not from here because nobody knows how to say any of the French names.
Listen, I worked in Lake Charles, Louisiana. It was my first job out of college at KBIU, Bayou 104. You got that right. And I remember going on the air and saying Nacogdoches.
Oh, well, if you'd been in Texas, you'd have been right instead of Natchitoches.
No, Louisiana, it's Natchitoches. And don't ever say Richard. Ever.
Richard. Yeah. Yeah, I learned that. A friend of mine from Nova Scotia, she's an artist, Lisa Richard. She walked in and I said, Lisa Richard. And she goes, you're the only person that says my name like that. And I said, we're like related. Nova Scotia, Acadiana, we're all together, you know.
My first day on the air at Bayou 104, they had a remote at Richard 66. And nobody had said a thing to me. And I said, hey, join Mark Roberts this afternoon at Richard 66. And the phones lit up. And that was my first introduction to how provincial Louisiana is.
Oh, it very much is. It's like, people say, have you been to Europe? I said, no, I grew up there in Louisiana. It really is very, very different. And North Louisiana is so different, too. That's where I really hail from, is that northeast corner that's 30 minutes south across at Arkansas and Monroe and that area. So it's a little bit different.
I didn't know. I started when I was 13 years old, and I had no idea that you could do something fun for a living. Everybody I knew hated their jobs. And so I never considered radio a career. And I went all the way through high school, and I kept getting job offers in college. And I worked all the way through college and helped pay for it. But I never considered it as a career because I didn't even think you could do something fun for a living. How about you?
It's so funny you would say that. I was the same exact way. You had to do something very practical or whatever. And this was always radio's my plan B. It was always my plan B. It's like I was always working for something else and, studying something else, whatever. And then a college kid was interviewing me you know. And I said, well, radio's, really my plan B and whatever. She said, Miss Devin, how long have you been doing it? I think it's your plan A. I went, oh, I guess it was. It was one of those kind of things. And I go, and people talking about retirement, I go, what? So I can not play records and hang out with my friends? And what?
Listen, I had a guy we'd worked together in Enterprise, Alabama, because I'm not
Yeah,
one of those people who've worked at 37 stations. I only have about 5 or 6 stations, but I remember them all
right.
because they're very dear to me. And I was working at WKMX, and I had and I was getting ready to get out of school. I majored in English Lit because I didn't know what else to do. And
Yeah.
this guy I'd worked with called me and said, "Listen, we have a gig open here in Lake Charles, Louisiana, from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., and you ought to come do it." And I'm like, I'm getting ready to get my certificate. I was going to go teach. He goes, "Gary, let me explain your career choices to you. You can either teach Shakespeare to 10th graders, or you can sit in a room and talk to a stick. And I've seen you talk to the stick, and I think you kind of have fun with it." And so I decided to give it a try. And I think the best thing the good Lord ever blessed me with is, from the moment I got in this business, I never considered that the business owed me anything. And at the moment that I reached my level of incompetence, it'd kick me out. And then I would find plan B, as you say. But I was just
Yeah.
going to, and so far the wave keeps going and I haven't fallen off the board yet.
The same. And now with podcasting, we don't even need a typical quote unquote radio station to do what we do. I mean, we can create our own, you said in my fantasy station. And now I guess I get to have one.
What we do is we took, because KRTY went off the air, our owner died. He was 98 years old, and we got outbid to try to buy the station by EMF, and they paid 6 times what it was worth, but they've always been wonderful. They were always wonderful to us. We
Hmm.
decided, because we went off the air, usually you don't have money or ratings. We went off the air with
Yeah.
historic ratings. And so we decided to give it a try as on the stream. And, my partners and I, they were like, well, we'll do 6 months. I'm like, I think we have a pretty good brand. We're going on 3 years now. So I still get up and do a morning show every morning. How about that?
I think that is so awesome. It's so awesome. Well, I have a couple of them in the works. I have a podcast that I do with Twitty and Lynn, the grandchildren of Conway and Loretta.
Wow.
And we have so much fun. And we do that once a month. But there's one that, and I still do some interviews and things that I'm about to launch some of those in a podcast form. There's some stories about Nashville that haven't been told yet. And some of them are scandalous and some of them are scary and some of them are, but most of them are very inspiring. Um, and I always found that some of the people that I met in country music, where they came from and what they had to overcome was more inspiring than any song they ever recorded. You know?
Amen. I can't wait to hear that. And you're right. It's one of the
Oh,
reasons I wanted
thank
to
you.
talk to you, because you and I, we got stories. I mean, we've been doing this
We
for a
do.
long
Yeah.
time. And we've been seeing people. I mean, the best thing about being out here in San Jose, California, not the traditional market, but we were never we were always locally owned. So we made all of our
Oh,
own
see, that's
decisions.
awesome.
And there's people who still owe their careers to us because we played them when nobody else did. For a while there, the Little Big Town was our house band. We would bring them out every 6 weeks just to pay them so they could pay their rent. Because remember, after Boondocks, there was a fallow period.
Yeah.
So we got all kind of stories. And when you talk about that, yeah, we try to share with people stories, but without getting anybody in trouble or stuff. I always just try to share the fun stories. But you've been doing this long enough. You hear some stuff that just make you go, wow, and you made it through that. And you're
Yeah.
right, it's very inspiring.
It truly is. I love that you brought up Little Big Town because Jimmy and Karen used to sing demos for me. I'm a songwriter, and so I would always
Oh, we're
bring
going to get
in.
into that. Don't worry. I'm not letting you get off this hook.
Oh, it's so funny. Well, one of the things that I loved is that Jimmy and Karen could sing anything, and they were so great. And she said, we always loved doing stuff for you because you would pay us more than the demo rate that anybody was doing. And you always you had a check waiting for us when we did it. And like you said, paying their rent. I mean, it really is that simple. I mean, if you hire somebody to fix your toilet or your sink or come out and do some electrical work, you don't think twice. You don't say, hey, we're going to really promote what you do. Would you do this for free? No, you would never think about that, because somebody has a fun job. You ask them to do it for free because, well, they're just singing, right? No.
Mhm.
And they literally were just trying to make a living. And
We would, you'd have these kids on radio tours, and as
yeah,
well as I
oh,
do. We started doing the thing where instead of just coming into the station, we had a little local nightclub dive bar. And what we would do is we'd bring them out to the dive bar and we would give them a cut of the alcohol sales, and they weren't making anything. They weren't making anything. And we've had
right.
stars, big stars now, literally break down and cry because they had no money left. Because record companies sent them on these radio tours and don't pay them anything. Right.
Oh, they
And
don't.
so,
That's what nobody knows, is that the artist is solely responsible for their radio tour.
mhm. And it changed the game. It changed the thing where people started kind of following our lead because it started getting known that, well, you come out here and we're going to set up. And then we started charging $2 and $3 covers and $5 covers and then $10 covers. And then we would pay these kids to bring. And the beautiful thing is we developed such a relationship with them that when they became big and played the arena, they would come do the after shows at these, at the small dive bar,
Oh,
Eric
that's so good.
Eric Church
Yeah,
played the arena and then came and played the dive bar.
of
It's
course he did.
that kind of level, but that's because we had developed that relationship, which is the thing you and I both know, and not to try to turn into the old man yelling at kids to get off our lawn, but the world of radio has changed so much that it's dying, and it breaks my heart.
It really does. But what you're doing and the whole connection with people, I said, you know why radio's dying, Gary? It's because radio, the big gargantuous, gorilla of radio, forgot what they were there for. It's number one, service to your community. You're the first access to a public. 24/7, if something breaks, if something happens, people knew that they could go to the radio for information, for help, for guidance, whatever. And when they stopped answering a phone, when they stopped taking emails, when they stopped listening to their constituency went somewhere else. And and only, I think, the only hope we have in radio right now is the small independently owned stations. And those places are still in demand.
You nailed it. I mean, listen, and I was having this conversation years ago with a group of people, and I'm like, listen, when I first started in radio, my job was to make sure you knew about the tire sale at Western Auto. That was
Right.
literally a half mile away, right? And you can go call and ask for Mike at Western Auto because it was that locally tied in. And then when the conglomerates got involved and they decided, you're old enough. I don't mean that as pejorative. You and I have been doing this the same amount of time. You remember when the big companies came out and they decided they were going to have a 10% increase in profits every year. They said that out loud. That That's crazy. That's crazy talk. And then the companies got so big that it's top heavy, and now it's the tower can't stop falling. And it's a
Uh-huh.
shame because you don't have local radio stations. You have, and if you're still working in this industry, I almost kind of feel sorry for you because you're probably doing anywhere between 10 to 20 stations and not getting paid extra for it.
Yeah. And and that's not fun. You and I both know it's just not fun. The whole joy of radio is communication. That's what we do. And you communicate an advertiser's business to someone, you communicate a new artist to someone in a public, and you communicate what the public wants to everybody else. And it really is a circle when it's good.
You know what I love about you, and I've always respected about you? You, more than anybody else I know in this industry, have maximized your talents. You have,
Oh,
nobody has done what you've done. I mean, as far as like all the things that you do, I always tell everybody I'm a dancing monkey. This is what I do. This is what I do right here. And I do it really, really well. But don't ask me to do anything else because I'm a dancing monkey. And you are an author. You've written books. You've done over 100 narrating of audiobooks. You've done radio. You've done TV. You've done national commercials. You're doing podcasts. You're starting up this network. All this other things. It's like, were you always that way? Were you always that way?
when I was little, people would ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I said, I just don't want to be bored. And I love a lot of things. I said, if I stay still in something too long, I mean, I love everything I've ever done, but there's always a big list of stuff. I go, well, I haven't done that yet. Well, I want to do that. Well, let me try that. I mean, my sister and I were on the phone this morning talking about our fantasy restaurant that we want to create, and, we all have our fantasy things that we want to do. I've got, a senior living community that I want to create, because I said there's a problem because I are that now, and I go, what do you do? And I have all these friends that I go, well, senior living is so different than it used to be. I still want to have horses and goats and my farm animals are like I have in my rescue ranch, but I would love to have other people close by that were like-minded. And someone told me, they said, oh, you're creating a commune. And I said, no, it's probably for me a compound, but
I
what I mean is if you have an interest, the bottom line is if you have something you haven't done, do it. And I'm of the age and I saw this in a movie last night and I was really blown away by this line. When you get, no, it was the new show, the new season of Hacks that's on Cinemax with, in it. And it's a comedian and she's been there for a while. She's kind of a stellar old comedian and she's finally getting a break. And she said, when you're your age, talking to the younger comedian, she said, I said, one day I will. And she says, but when you're my age, you have to do it now because you can't say one day in the future. You don't know how long you've got. So everything that you've got on your list, do it. If not now, when? Just try it.
See, I think my problem is, Devin, is I love being bored. Oh, wow, do I love it. Because to me, bored, because I think bored gets a bad rap. A lot of great things have come about because we got bored. And for me, it means I've got everything taken care of. And now I can just wallow in whatever I want to wallow in. And there's some of those ideas, but now I respect it because I have friends who are just like you. I've got a friend of mine who's the hardest working guy I know. He can't sit. If you go to his house and you're sitting having a glass of wine with him, while he's talking to you as you take sips, he will take a wet wipe and wipe underneath the glass where you just took a sip at. Because he just can't stop. He just can't stop.
Don't think that I can't. Don't think that I can't stop.
But I mean, and I asked him, I said, are you OCD? And he goes, no, I just know I have to clean things up later. And he goes, I'm just trying to be productive with my time. And I'm like, okay. I see where you're at on that, but your ability and some of the stuff. I mean, because we're going to talk radio, we're going to talk how and talk songwriting, but I just had Scott Brick on for my 100th episode, right? Because I'm a big audiobook narrator fan. I love audiobooks, devour them. And Scott Brick, I reached out to him and they said yes. And I'm like, you're kidding me, really? And so the narrating and I've said this before. Somebody asked me, well, why don't you narrate? I'm like, can't. Oh, sure you can. No, I can't. It is a specific skill set. And usually you don't meet a lot of radio people who do that because they're 100% opposite in my mind. But you are the only person I know who does do it. I want to get your take on how you got into it and what do you see the differences at?
Well, I always loved acting and I thought one day I was going to be an actress and I really loved presenting, different characters and things like that. And always involved in that. That was always my plan A. I was going to be an actress. I went to New York to become an actress and studied voiceover and started working with Don Cobiella, the original voice of MTV. And Don was talking to me and he says, radio people are terrible at voiceover. They're terrible at it. And I said, why? And he said, because they can't stop that radio delivery. And he says, if you can master the art of what you want to do with acting and focus that into your voiceover, you have a future. But if you can't let it go, and I thought, and then I started practicing reading out loud. And I go, I loved listening to audiobooks. Dixie Carter, she,
Designing
oh my
Women.
Lord, Designing Women. She read this beautiful version of the sequel to Gone with the Wind. And I use that with my air quotes, a book called Scarlet. And that was one of the first audiobooks that I'd ever gotten. And I went, oh, I just loved her voice. I love what she did. And then I heard Peter Coyote read The Horse Whisperer. And I went, oh my gosh. I mean, I literally was on a 10-hour drive. I pulled into my driveway and could not stop listening and sat in my driveway and listened to the rest of the book. And because he was so captivating, I said, I want to do that. So I started just reading out loud all the time. And I started letting books come alive. I mean, I was president of my library club. I love books and I love reading. And then I just started realizing that people didn't read, and they didn't read because they can't focus when they open up a book. But I said, but if I can take people and I can read to them and get them into a book, oh, wouldn't that be fun? So I started doing it, and I realized I have the attention span that I can just literally, I go into the book. I live these characters. I just go into it. And I mean, I walk in, I get prepared for it. I put my hair back. I don't wear any makeup. And so I become these characters and I live the book for a good week.
Wow.
So,
See, I find it fascinating because I want to find out how the way you work on that too. I said English lit major. I've done the whole thing where I'd read the books out loud. I've tried to record stuff. But I will say this: you still sell your talent short
oh,
because no, actors are great. I love my first person that I fell in love with. Darren McGavin read the old Travis McGee
oh,
novels, and he was mesmerizing.
oh,
But
just great.
yeah, and you listen to these actors, there are so many. It's what Scott Rick is. I mean, Scott Rick is just that everyman. Ray Porter. These guys are just the actress who she was the Gone Girl. She was the main character, and I can't remember her name. But I listened to a book she read.
Yeah.
I was same thing. I was transfixed. I was out of the hunting cabin in Texas, and I told my buddies it was during the day. I said, I'm just going to go for a run. It's going to be a quick run. I'm listening to this book. And my runs usually last 45 minutes to an hour. I come back like 2 hours later and I'm like dying. And they're like, what are you doing? I'm like, this damn book. This book, I couldn't turn it off. I couldn't turn it off. I just had to keep going. I like that. So I love that. But I do have to ask you, because I asked Scott, I'm like, how do you read it? And he goes, I read through it. I go through it. I say it out loud. If I need to record another line, I'll do it. That didn't sound right, like that. But Ray Porter reads it sight unseen. Ray Porter just goes into it. And I'm like, I have no idea how you do that. So I'm asking you, how did you record?
Oh, I work with a really great, I don't record myself. I work with a great engineer, Dave Walton, who's also a radio guy, by the way. He was with WKDF in the rock days when it was just, album oriented rock. And he was just, it was, what is it? WKRP in Cincinnati.
I swear by all that is holy, I thought turkeys could fly.
I thought turkeys could fly. Well, anyway, that's where he comes from. And he and I have worked together, and he's my other set of ears, but then I can just focus on my characters, and I do it sight unseen too. I like a cold read because I want to experience that book. I don't read ahead. Sometimes I'll look at the characters and so they'll send me a little character study of what the characters are and who they are. But I want to get that first feel of the book I don't want to like know what's coming because I don't want to cloud how I do it. I want to read that book. And when I get excited about what's going to happen next, it changes in your voice.
Wow. That is borderline psychotic. It
I
really
know.
is. Because if I were going to do it, because after I do it, because I'll get caught by surprise where I'll read it one way and then you realize, oh, well, it was meant this way a paragraph later. And you're like, oh. And so for you to be able to have that thing that processes, because what you're doing is you're processing in the future, which is allowing you to read now. That crazy.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
I'm a little bit. Yeah, it's a little bit weird. They call me this weird. They call me the machine at the studio. They said we've never seen anybody that can read so long and get. But there's certain authors that I just really connect with. Lise Wheel, who was on O'Reilly's
Fox.
show for a while.
Mhm.
She wrote some books that I'm telling you what, she is one heck of a writer. Her ideas, and she wrote with other writers, so I'm not sure how much of it she wrote, but she wrote with Pete Nelson and a couple of other people that were just wonderful. But they had these twists and turns and mystery and I go, this woman is spectacular as far as, and all of it, dealt with a lot of headlines that had been in the news and things like that. But it was fascinating. And a lot of powers of good and evil were always at war. And so she's one of my favorite writers that she's not writing anymore. Of course, she got this big settlement, so you don't have to, I guess. But
Ooh, that's another story.
yeah, that's a whole other story.
Look
that
up,
I
look up Lise Wheel and Bill O'Reilly, and you'll figure out why.
Yeah, just a little Google. Just a little Google.
Sterling Oak Cabinetry has one goal: to build the cabinets of your dreams. They literally specialize in custom cabinetry. No cookie cutter, everything looks the same stuff that you find at the big box stores. Your kitchen is the centerpiece of your home, and your home is your biggest investment. They can work with you or your designer to build just what you want with the materials and finish that you want. And because they're a brand new company, they'll be getting busier and busier. But if you order right now, they'll get your order to you in 6 to 8 weeks. In the world of cabinetry, that's blindingly fast. Contact Rob Scovman at RSKOVMAND at yahoo.com or go to sterlingoakcabinetry.com and get your dreams made reality tomorrow.
I'm with Mike and Brenda Council with another real Mike Council plumbing and rooter story. Let's talk about the early days. What was it like?
Well, when we first started, the phone was by the bed.
So just the two of you?
Exactly.
And I would answer the emergency calls in the middle of the night. I'd wake up and answer them.
2:00, I'm headed out the door.
So 30 years ago.
30 years and 6 months.
But I hear Mike Council Plumbing might have had its beginnings when you were, what, a kid?
Yeah, I grew up in a little one-room shack, and we had an outhouse out back.
An outhouse?
That's correct.
Oh, my.
And ended up with a great appreciation for indoor plumbing.
Yeah, I guess. And when you finally got it?
It was a great day.
Since 1993, the people of San Jose and the South Bay have trusted Mike Council Plumbing and Rooter for all their plumbing needs. From emergencies like a drain backup or water leak, maybe you need a new water heater or fixture installed, a gas appliance hooked up. Give Mike Council a call at 408-217-1002 or go to mcplumbing.com, an official partner of the San Jose Sharks.
You're in clean hands with Mike Council Plumbing and Rooter.
I find it fascinating. Did you become an author first and then do the narration? Was it narrating, then writing the books, or was it just something that just organically happened at the same time?
On my list of things to do in my whole life, I don't call it a bucket list. I call it a to-do list. And when I was a little girl, I had all these things on my list that I wanted to be. And my goal before I left this planet was I wanted to write a book that would be in libraries. I studied writing when I went to New York City. I studied under authors. I graduated. My degree is in general studies because I just wanted a degree. I just studied everything I wanted to. When I graduated, I had enough that I could have had a master's degree if I'd only studied one thing.
Wow.
And they go, you can leave now.
Well, if you didn't want to pay us, we'll take your money. Bye.
Yeah, but you can leave now. You've got your degree. And I go, okay. So I went to New York and I started studying again at NYU with authors. And I I would try to write romance novels, and I'd try to write this and try to write that. And I got just, you'd read your pages to the class, and it's a collective yawn. It's like, and I was not used to yawns. I go, no. I was a super soaker. I was always that person that said, I'm gonna win. And the author that was leading the class, he said, you've got talent, but you've got to be vulnerable enough to write what you know. So I was so mad. So I went back and I wrote these pages. And basically, it was a conversation between my grandparents on the front porch in Catahoula Parish on a red dirt road at the end of the day. Nothing really happens. It was just a slice of, as you would call it, boredom. And I looked up from reading, and I had put myself in this place, and I saw them and I felt them, and I delivered my grandparents to these people in New York City, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. And at the end, Ernest Brawley, the writer that was leading the class, he goes, now you're a writer. And so when I had never written a book, I'd never had the thing, I just didn't have the wherewithal. My heart horse, my Maria, passed away, and I couldn't deal with it. I just couldn't. I wrote her story there. I had to write her story out because this horse had saved my life in many ways. And I was doing an interview with Toby Keith, and I got the phone call that something had happened to Maria. And so I went to the barn, and Toby called, and he was checking on me. That's why Toby will always be in my heart as one of the best guys there is. And so we tried everything, couldn't save her life. And so the next day, in that grief, I started writing her story, and I finished this story. And then another animal that had come to me, I wrote their story, and then another one. Pretty soon I had 7 stories. And my friend Brian, who just a friend, and he worked over at Thomas Nelson. And I said, would you see if this is any good? And he called me back. He said, everybody in this whole floor at Thomas Nelson is crying. Would you like a book deal? And that was my first book, My Angels Wear Fur. And so it didn't come because I said, I'm going to go get an agent, and I'm going to write query letters, and I'm going to do. No, it was just write what you know, do what you know, and be very authentic to who you are. And, God never forgets a dream that he puts in your heart. God doesn't forget. When I was little, I wanted to write for Guidepost magazine. I never told a soul. And I had some really difficult times, as we do in our lives. And I was in my burgeoning almost 60s, right? I mean, right there close to 60s. And, when you start thinking, well, I'm going to wind down, I'm going to, start looking at what's the end of my life. And I got a phone call, and they said, we've been trying to reach you. We saw one of your devotion books, and we want to create a new imprint at Guidepost magazine. And we want to know if we can use some of your work, and we want to know if you'd be one of our contributing writers. So that's where All God's Creatures, the Guidepost imprint for animals, came from. And they started with one of my books. And God never forgets a dream that he puts in your heart.
That's
so
beautiful.
Anybody listening, if you go back and look at your little kid list, your little kid is always smarter than your big kid.
My little kid wanted to be an astronaut, so I don't know about that.
Well, it might be different in a different way. I always say that maybe the astronaut, you're supposed to tell their stories.
And I've got this fascination with science and space, and actually do a bit every Friday, right? That we do science, and I nerd out. So yeah, I got to play with space in my own way. What I will say is, out of all the things, I went to college, I was in plays, I was in drama, I was an actor, I've done TV, I've done all of this. Out of everything that involves a creative space, in my opinion, there is nothing harder than writing. And for you to be able to sit down and churn that out and be that vulnerable, again, I sound like the biggest Devin O'Day cheerleader in the world because you just keep selling yourself short. And I realize God gave you a humble heart, and I respect that. But it's for me to stand on the soapbox and go, y'all see this? It's like my dad used to say, if they sold Florida for a nickel, I couldn't buy a tangerine. I'd have to stand on the side of the road and yell, look, what a deal, what a deal. I mean, I get it. and that's why I'm with you. So when you say this writing and you wrote this, and then you've written songs as we go into this, you turn that into a songwriting thing. And no, I can't write a song, and I've never tried. I think I've inspired a couple of songs from just conversations I've had with songwriters, but the idea of sitting back and going, okay, I'm going to write this song now. I mean, that takes a whole lot of self-belief. It really does, especially when you're in Nashville. And just before, and again, because I want to cover this up, she's had a #1 song from George Strait. She's recorded, she's had people like Trace Adkins and Bo Cephas, who was Hank Williams Jr. for you younger folks. And the woman my wife calls my girlfriend, Lee Ann Womack, record your song. So this is not a fly-by-night operation. I mean, that took a lot of chutzpah, as they say.
I always had stuff I wanted to express, wanted to get out, and I didn't know how to do it. So I'd sit in my room as a kid and sit with a $75 guitar from the wall at Musicland, and I still have that guitar. I still write songs on it. It's where all the songs live. And no matter what guitar I've had, I still go back to that $75 guitar, and it still sounds really good, by the way. I just wanted to write, and here's the difference: is I wasn't writing to get a cut, to get a song recorded. I just wrote because I had something I wanted to say. And the hard part was, I go, you mean I'm supposed to pitch this to an artist to see if somebody will cut it? I didn't know how to do that. When I was 14, 15 years old, I was in Louisiana, and I loved to sing, and I was singing harmony. My sister was singing harmony, and my mom took us in to meet Jay Chevalier, who had a recording studio, and he had a live show like the Opry, but in Louisiana. And so we had a live radio show, and so I became a backup singer, and he said, oh, well, play me some of your little songs that you've been writing. And all of a sudden, he heard them, and he goes, who helped you with these? I said, nobody. I just sit in my room and write these songs. And so I was playing piano and writing these songs. Well, pretty soon I was writing a new song a week for them to present on the show. And the other people were singing them. But when I got to, then I went to college, and my praise and worship leader was right. She heard me do some songs, and she says, well, these are pretty good. Well, if you ever get to Nashville, look me up. And I said, oh, you live in Nashville? She goes, yeah, I had a few songs recorded, and I'm a writer, and I'm going to go back and I'll work with you in publishing. And I said, okay. Well, she was my praise and worship leader. I didn't know anything about her. Well, her name was Linda Hargrove, and Linda wrote a little song called Tennessee Whiskey with Dean Dillon. And that was just one of the many songs that she wrote and had done. I didn't know anything about anything, but there's always somebody. I would say I'm a very spiritual person, because I feel like God has always put somebody in my path. And I don't think there's ever any accident. If you notice who's in your path, there aren't accidents. Even the people who were not wonderful, fun experiences usually taught you something.
Mm-hmm.
And Linda signed me when I got there as a songwriter and helped me understand songwriting more. She really helped me with the business more. She signed me, and she signed Phil Vassar. We were her two people that she signed.
Sylvester.
Yes. Man, talk about an inspiring story. That man, he has really come through it. When you talk about heart attack, stroke, and things like that, and come back and playing piano again and working that, he's something.
And that scariest part, Phil was always one of the healthiest people I ever knew. I mean, when he came in, he always looked like What, are you going to sing or are you going to be in a superhero movie?
I know. Are you going to do a workout video? I mean, truly.
There are so many, and I have to ask, because you got into the world of radio, you worked at WSN, but your fame really was at WSIX.
Yes.
Part of the House
Jerry
Foundation. Jerry House, legendary. The only time I ever met Jerry is I was in Nashville at CRS, and he was in the Ural next to me. And that was the only conversation. It wasn't a conversation. I think we just looked at each other and said, well, okay, whatever. And I remember I came out and told the people at my station, I said, I just took a leak next to Jerry House. So I guess my career's kind of finished, whatever I need. But what was that like? And I have to ask you this. The thing with the House Foundation, there were, I think at 1.5 of you.
Yeah.
Okay. The most I've ever had on a show, and I've been doing morning radio forever, was 3. And it was hard to get 3 people. 5, and I know you were the quote, quote, producer, and in the vernacular of the day, so please don't, you were the chick voice. That was the vernacular of the day.
Chick, yeah.
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 And back when you could say stuff like that. What was that like? And that was, I don't have questions when I do these podcasts, but that's the only one that I had. Okay, I've got to ask that question.
It was the most fun, magical time. And people always ask, they go, well, when Jerry worked, when you guys had the delay, you could always catch stuff. I go, we didn't work with a delay. And they'd go, what? I said, no, it was all fly by the seat of your pants. We weren't recording bits ahead of time. I mean, he recorded some bits, but I mean, all that phone work and all. And Jerry always said, he goes, you're like the human bio. He goes, first of all, I was running notes back and forth with Post-it notes and a little board and telling him who was on each phone, but I would screen the calls, but I would do them in an A, B, a C. C was always the kicker. So I always had the calls would always lead one to the other, and go, take him in this order, Jerry. And here's your last guy, and he's going to be magic. And he didn't know what they were going to say either. I mean, Jerry and I were always psychic with each other. He could think it, and I'd be handing him whatever he was thinking of.
Wow.
And it just worked in a really magic way. That's why we wrote songs well together. I mean, I wrote the George Strait song with him, and he opened doors for me that I couldn't have done what I've done in this career had he not opened those doors. And was he now I will say that he was sometimes my best friend, and he infuriated me, and he made me mad, and he demanded perfection all the time, but he never demanded more than he demanded of himself. He was always there before anyone else, staying there after everyone else. He wrote longer, and it was all about writing. And people go, gosh, I'll go to lunch almost every day. I said, you see those yellow legal pads? I said, we're constantly coming up with new material, because we don't, like in the morning show, and you understand this, you have 4 hours to fill. Now they just repeat the first 2 hours stuff in the second 2 hours because nobody's listening. And it's that long. And I go, there's something called, for those people who are not in radio, time spent listening, TSL, time spent listening. Our time spent listening was longer than any other radio show in the history of radio. And they said, why? And I said, because we don't repeat anything. It's all live. You never know what's going to happen. I said, some days are diamond, some days are stone. But, for the most part, you just wait for the magic to happen and pay attention. You can't, you just can't even imagine how cool that is. This is the best drug in the world, where timing would happen and something magical would happen. You go, oh my God, this happened. Oh, this was just the greatest day ever. And then there were those that weren't, but
And the truth of it is the days that you thought were awesome, people probably didn't care. And the day that you thought you blew up and died, I've had that happen to me. That was the funniest thing I've ever heard. That was the best thing you've ever done. Really? I thought I sucked so large that day. And that's I did become that with ratings because you could go crazy. And I finally sat down with my general manager one day and I said, listen, here's what you need to know. I'm working really hard when the ratings suck. And when the ratings are good, I'm probably lazier than anybody you know, right? Because you just can't, it's the same guy. I'm putting in the same amount of effort is my point. That no matter what, it's the same amount of effort. And you're right, those magical days, I just never understood how you could get all the five. And the thing I love about radio is everybody has such a different working attitude. I've known people who've been doing this forever. I used to know a guy who would literally write everything down that he was doing in the afternoon show. And the brilliance of him is that it sounded like he was making it up. That was, and like you guys writing all this stuff and preparing to be ready to go. A buddy of mine is a surgeon and he goes, what time did you get to the station? And I'm like, I go in there at 5, I'd get there at 4:40. And he goes, really? And I'm like, yeah, cup a little coffee and wake up. He goes, how do you do that? I said, James, when you have surgery at 6, when do you get there? He goes, 5:30, 5:45. And I said, just to wash up, right? And he goes, yeah. And I said, and if you screw up, somebody dies. Not for me.
Right.
And he goes, well, I never know what I'm going to find till I get there. And I'm like, you just described the best form of radio. Don't know what's going to happen till we get there. And then we'll go from there. And Jerry, bless Jerry's heart, because I don't know. I've never had a conversation with him. Like I said, you don't talk when you're in Europe. But I did have a chance to play golf with Rick Dees, another legendary.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes.
And as I told them, they got to work. Radio doesn't make money now. It was in Jerry House's and Rick Dees days, back in the 80s and the 90s, that radio made the most money. And it was like, wow, you could understand the whole concept. That was a crazy time, especially being in Nashville when you were right there, because those jobs were far and few between and in demand.
Right. We owe a lot to a great general manager and sales director, and Dave Hollywood Manning was our sales guy, general manager. He had these cockamamie ideas that nobody had ever done in radio. He drove a red Ferrari and he had these hand-tailored suits, and he walked in and he said, you got to dress the part, man. He didn't send us out in station logos and all that. He says, no. He said, you dress. And he said, I want every one of my personalities to show up in a limo wherever they go. So he got, and he did a trade for a limo company. So when we showed up at a remote, he wanted people to show up. Our morning team, we were dressed nice. We showed up and he goes, you make celebrities out of your morning team. People pay more to have them there. Okay. Then he said, let's do that with the afternoon team. Okay. Now let's do this with the midday guy. Okay. He literally had everything kind of worked out. He makes celebrities out of everybody on the station. And so he got more money. And he would ask, people were paying so much money to have a live spot done by Jerry House. And then Carl P. Mayfield, who was in the afternoon, same thing. And it was interesting because when you value your talent and you sell that ideal and say, he just went, and Dave started going to New York and meeting with big advertising agencies who never bought country radio, ever. He says, we can sell Cadillacs. I said, why? And he goes, well, as far as I look around Nashville, I see all these country artists and they're driving Cadillacs. Why don't we sell you some Cadillacs? And what? And he changed the whole thing. So Dave Hollywood Manning, and you can look him up. He really was influential. It's how you sell radio that really makes it financially lucrative or not.
Y'all just had some inside radio scoop right there on how that happened. Here's why I knew I was going to have such a good time with you. And I also knew I was going to be able to pack it into the hour that I had with you. And bless your heart, you cut out time. And so the fact that you took time to do that, and I still haven't got around to talking to you about all the things I want to talk to you about. Because
let's do it again.
If you would, that was what I was leading up to. That I'm going to try to get on and just talk about this and how our lives have changed in the way. Remember when all we had was 5 minutes to do an interview? That you had to get your interview in 5 minutes. And the best thing that ever happened to us with COVID is that we started doing 15-minute interviews, and the ratings went up. And now with this beautiful thing, now you and I talk to people for an hour. Isn't that the craziest thing?
I know. And I love it with all of my heart. I just love these conversations because everybody is a book, everybody's a story, everybody's a movie. I mean, if you just sit and talk to people, you go, oh my gosh, there's so many interesting stories. And thank you for the time that you spent with me today, because I want to know more about you. Now I'm going to have you on mine.
I'm all in. I'm all there. And if everybody's a movie, can you pull some strings and get Riley Green to play me in the movie? Can you?
Yeah, as long as I get to be on set.
Yeah, I don't care. I won't be
Green.
there, but that's a request. That's a request from my wife, by the way.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Well, she and I could be on on set.
Oh, yeah. And to tell you the stories like that, she had the biggest crush on Keith Urban, right? Before we got married, and we were dating, we were engaged to be married. And I had to do an interview with Keith. And I said, hey, would you do me a favor? And he goes, what? And this is the beginning. And I said, could you call my fiance at work and say hello to her? And it was her birthday. And he goes, absolutely. I'm like, thank you, man. I said, I never ask for things like this, but you're her favorite. And so I called her at work, and she doesn't answer, and it goes to voicemail. And Keith, being Keith, who's the nicest human to ever walk face the earth, he leaves this wonderful message. And we get done, and she calls me later, and she's freaking out. And I said, why didn't you answer the phone? She goes, I'm so glad I didn't, because if I'd answered the phone, I would just had the conversation. Now everybody gets to hear it. And I told him years ago, right after, because we have children the similar age now. And I said, here's what you need to know. You're my wife's free pass. If you decide you want my wife, I'm going to help her pack. And she'll leave. I said, tell Nicole she's more than happy to come over and have tacos with us after you and my wife leave. And he's like, yeah, I'll do that, Gary. So we haven't even got into all your stories, because I want to ask you about Brenda Lee. I want to ask you about all your Nashville friends. I want to ask you about the crazy things you've seen. I want to share some of these stories. So, I mean, we're going to do another episode, and my God, we may end up doing a podcast together, because I'm just having too much fun with it.
You know what? I was just thinking, between you and me, our stories would be pretty juicy. I think that'd be really fun.
You are the best, Devin O'Day. And like I said, stop selling yourself short, which is hard to do, but you still find a way to do it.
Thank you so much, Gary. You're so sweet, so kind.